it comes to exploring abandoned areas. I really enjoy doing this, and just to clear some stuff up, I would try my best not to enter private property or restricted areas that would be considered trespassing. I just think that would be a really bad decision to make. So with these abandoned places, I generally look for those that aren't fenced off and make sure to look for any signs so that I'm not entering restricted properties. Anyway, I had researched online and found this abandoned town area, while also trying to find its exact location on Google Maps. The only thing I could find of it would just be an old video of what the town kinda looked like before it was abandoned, but it wasn't too much of a detailed or long video, so I'm guessing it was only isolated recently. However, it would be pretty cool to explore around still. Since it wasn't really an indoor exploration compared to like a grocery store, I would decide to go at nighttime, as I wouldn't even be going inside the buildings anyway. My only objective was to slowly drive around the town and probably get some nice pictures or something. I mean, sometimes taking my camera wouldn't be a bad idea, so it would be nice to take it with me in some of my explorations. I got inside my car, getting ready to take on this 2-hour journey there, making sure I took the important stuff with me, like some food and my phone. I don't think I would be crazy enough to try staying there overnight in my car. Crossing that boundary was a little too much in my opinion. My car was quite large and stored quite some stuff in there. Me being a solo guy most times, I wouldn't need to worry about other people sitting in my car, so I just placed whatever stuff in there as a way for storage, I guess. I was driving over to the place and it was like 7 p.m. During these times, it would get dark pretty early, so it wasn't like I went there when it was really late, but of course, just enough for it to be hard to see. Around 9:30 p.m., that was when I'd arrived at the location. It was surrounded by open land with barely any other buildings nearby, except for the ones within the town, of course. I slowly drove through onto the road, which wasn't in the best of conditions, but it also wasn't the worst. I still think this town was abandoned not too long ago, so not everything was run down and rusting away. It was actually not even that bad, but still very noticeable, of course. I drove next to this abandoned gas station, and it looked like it would be great to take a picture of, so I took out my camera to try taking it from the front of the place. I was still within my car, as I wouldn't be comfortable to exit my car and go back inside constantly for these pictures. It would be fine within my car anyway. I got done with that and slowly went even more further in. Surprisingly, it wasn't too dark in terms of the visibility. There were probably some lights still working, so when I was driving more into the town, there were some shadows that looked like from people standing up that I could see in the distance. My headlights were still on, so I turned it off just to be sure. And yeah, from this point, I think it was clear that there was some people there. Once I realized that, I decided to reverse my car to try getting out of there. But whoever was around the corner, they came out and stared in my direction for some time, before slowly walking towards me with a confused looking face. I quickly turned my car around and managed to do so before he could even get close to it. You know that feeling when you try to escape something or someone so fast in real life, or sometimes even when playing games, with that rush of urgency combined with fear that comes? Yeah, think about that, but while being in a car instead of running. I had to make sure I didn't mess up during the process, and thankfully I didn't. I managed to drive out safely and made my way back home. I wasn't there for too long, but I didn't want to intrude on other people who might possibly be staying or hanging around there. It felt both creepy and out of place for me to be there, you know? Just be careful if you do this kind of stuff. There might be random people around these areas, possibly dangerous or harmless, but we won't be certain for sure. Me and a couple of friends would pretty much go outside right after school most days. Let's call them Tyler and Jimmy. We had other friends too, but weren't that close in terms of hanging out outside of school. The three of us were usually close and I knew them for quite a while anyway. It was the end of a school day and I was walking with both Tyler and Jimmy. We were just talking about how we disliked this new update they released on Fortnite and stuff like that in general, until Jimmy interrupted, letting us know of some abandoned parking area he had found. I was questioning him, asking what is he even talking about. Tyler was unaware of this too, and we weren't too excited about where this was leading us. Anyway, the point was, Jimmy was scared to go explore alone, so he waited for the right time when me, Tyler, and himself would be free, so that we could all go with him. I personally didn't mind too much, but Tyler wasn't too excited, which I can quite understand why. He literally told us about this right that moment, and now we were expected to go in that same day without even any planning or information about it beforehand. I let Jimmy know that we will go with him, but wouldn't stay there for too long. It just wouldn't be ideal for me and Tyler. At least this way, there wouldn't be some long-term persistence in trying to make us go wherever this so-called abandoned parking area went. After some consideration, Tyler reluctantly accepted, and we started following Jimmy to the location. He let us know that we had to go through a dirt trail or road of some kind. which was overgrown with vegetation as he was describing to us. This already sounded strange to me. I mean, wouldn't a car park area be in the open, around buildings or streets at the very least? I had no idea, but in my mind, I was just thinking if this was a small or large one, so I asked him about this. He let me know that it was quite large, but he didn't fully explore it properly as he wanted to do it with us. I was still kinda confused to why there would be some parking area located within overgrown lands. However, if it really is abandoned, then I guess it makes sense. We got to the dirt road place that Jimmy had talked about. It looked like a standard forest type of place, but he was saying that beyond this path would be where the abandoned parking area is located, so we just continued walking through. It took probably like 5 minutes of getting by and we finally made it to this abandoned location. Jimmy was right though, it was quite large and looked very run down. I didn't really understand how it was possible to explore this area. I mean, it was just a car parking area that just requires you to use your eyes to see around. A big open space, what else is there to see? I asked Jimmy, what are we gonna do here? He said that me, Tyler, and himself will just use this as a location to hang out, with us three only knowing about it. I was thinking in my mind, there was no way I want to be going here again, especially having to go through that dirt trail. Tyler even said himself that he wasn't comfortable being around there, and I agree with him because it was quite eerie being there. I mean, just a large open space with barely any sounds and no one except us around there. We were just talking until we heard some voices coming from behind us. It was two grown men shouting at us, telling us to get out of there. They were wearing some baggy uniform of some kind, like someone who would work in a prison. I immediately felt that adrenaline coming in, that feeling to get out of there, so I pulled both Tyler and Jimmy's arm to start running. They constantly turned around while running back towards the dirt trail. Those two men were trying to jog towards us, but we were obviously sprinting, so they couldn't catch up to us. We made it out of the forest-looking area and kept running until we made it onto the main streets again. I asked Jimmy if he knew there were people maybe guarding that area, but he said he wasn't aware of it. We just stayed silent after walking for some time, until we individually made our separate ways to go back home. Just to keep it short, we never went back to that area again and don't plan on doing so whatsoever. Me, Tyler, and Jimmy are still great friends and even joke about the situation sometimes. Though it definitely wasn't safe for us kids to be going out exploring like that, and I would advise others to not get too curious on this level or more. Solo exploring these abandoned places gave me that dose of dopamine and fear that I for some reason craved. Around the age of 15, that was probably the peak of my explorations, so I would go quite often during my teenage years. It was just something I used some of my time doing. I wouldn't be too excessive in it, but I guess you could say it was my replacement of free time instead of playing video games or watching TV all day. I was going out to explore some abandoned factory-looking area one time. The way I find these are from community forums, where many people doing the same thing I did would be inside. The people in there would suggest many different locations and show pictures that they might have taken when they went there, or from Google Images maybe. I tried my best to look for these locations close by to where I lived and aren't restricted. The last thing I would want is getting arrested for doing this stuff, so I didn't want to do anything illegal, of course. I was still a teenager living in my parents' place after all. I found someone posting this abandoned factory place, which apparently was closed for quite some time, and he mentioned that anyone had access to visit the place as long as they didn't try vandalizing or destroying the property, while also mentioning that cameras were still put in place to possibly enforce this. It was decently close to my place, so I decided I could just take my bicycle there and explore for some time. I took my phone with me just in case. I didn't want to get lost and not know where to go if I did. That would be a really bad situation. I made my way over there, and surprisingly it didn't take too long cycling there, so I got off and placed my bicycle somewhere within a small bush. I started walking outside the factory. It was still pretty bright outside, so I wasn't scared or anything, but I did have that sense of uneasy feeling within me. I made my way inside of this abandoned factory building area. Of course, it looked very broken, and I spotted a few old-looking cameras just placed in the corners of high reach. I guess so that people aren't able to disrupt or break it as easily. When I was walking around, it wasn't too bad after a while, so I pulled out my phone and recorded some videos of just being there. I would later post these in the community forums when I got back home. I was doing that for some time and continued going on even more further in, though as I walked through this doorway, I stepped on something unknowingly and heard a click sound. I immediately looked down when I heard this and saw that some trap-looking thing was right where my feet had stepped on top of. I got really scared and jumped up a little. That was when I saw a rope that was meant to be connected to that trap thing, so the clicking sound came from the trap itself, though it wasn't connected to the rope. I looked up to see if there was anything else linked to this trap system, but nothing. I turned back around and went back to my bicycle, just feeling quite shocked. I cycled myself back home safely and went on the community forums, sending the videos and mentioning about the traps. The person who originally sent the factory location wasn't aware of any traps being placed there, so it was probably recent. It was definitely scary to think about and confusing to why that was there, but someone who previously went there must have had malicious intentions and set that up. I'm glad it was broken though when I got there. After that day, I decided to stop doing these abandoned explorations. I didn't realize how dangerous it could be when anyone could place stuff like traps or whatever around, potentially injuring people or worse. I hope other people take this story as a warning to be careful. Don't visit any abandoned areas alone if you're a constantly paranoid person, or just anyone in general, I would say. I mean, how do people even do these explorations without much fear? I guess there are those who can handle it more than others. Anyway, to get on to the story, it was an abandoned beach area that I had known for quite some time, probably for a couple years or so. I would mostly hear a lot about this place from people in school, which one time actually made me quite curious, so I was using the computer within the school's computer room, and since I had completed my work that the teacher had assigned for us, I could relax for some time before the class would end. I had just remembered about this specific beach area and tried researching the location, along with finding out the reason to why it was abandoned. The school computers were a lot more better than the home PC I would use, so it was good to use the time while I could. I tried searching for the exact location within Google Maps. It wasn't too hard to find, of course, since the name was well known with a lot of the people I'll be around. It was like an hour away from my place, so it was obviously a reasonable distance in some way, except still being a student with no car isn't exactly ideal if I was to try making it there. Fast forward a few years later, after getting a part-time job, I had managed to purchase myself a used car online for a pretty good amount of money. It was in quite good condition, and I could travel around a lot more without restriction, so that was another positive factor about that. I was just in bed one night, thinking about what I could do now since owning a car. There were many things, like being able to go get food outside probably more easier, going to work more faster and conveniently, along with many more stuff. Clearly, there were many options for me. I just kept thinking of other stuff, until I started remembering about the abandoned beach location from before. I was considering it, but also felt like it wouldn't be necessary, or it was just an old thing I should leave behind. I think it is easy for many people to change their mind over a few years, so it didn't sound as exciting like it did before. Even though I might have had this new change in mindset, it still made me quite curious to what the beach actually looked like in person, like actually going there, and maybe if there was interesting stuff there. I fell asleep and woke up the next day, and at around 9:30 a.m., I decided I could try maybe exploring around that abandoned beach place. I figured I could go a little before the time for work. It was kinda around the similar route to get there, so I didn't think this would be a burden to do, just to check it out for some time. I got my morning routine done and got inside my car, placing the location directions on my phone using Google Maps. I still remember the name, and it wouldn't be hard to find just by zooming out of the maps around my area anyway. I made my way over there and drove the hour to hopefully see any unique things about the place, potentially different from other beaches maybe. I got there, and it did have a strange type of environment around it. Rusty signs and just the old looking wooden docks in the distance. It was expected though, so not really surprising obviously. I parked my car around the area and just started walking over to the beach area. I do admit it was quite scary for me, even when it was daytime, but many of you guys might feel the same too around these sketchy places, right? I entered through one of the openings, and there weren't any fences or signs that restricted access to this place. I think it was still public to everyone. It was probably just naturally abandoned, rather than officially closing the place down. I don't really have knowledge on that, but it looked to be the case. There were a lot of dead grass and overgrown plants just around the area. Trash was in huge amounts on the beach too, with fire marks or something on the sand. It wasn't as crazy as I expected, and with how people were talking about it wasn't as bad. I was walking through, and all of a sudden, I heard a loud explosion of some kind from behind me. I turned around almost immediately and saw that there was a small boat with black smoke around it. I was so confused, and I just ran out of the beach and back to my car, driving to my workplace. It was quite shocking to think about what had just happened. Where did that explosion come from, and who was there? I was questioning this in my mind constantly. It was distracting, but I also did want to find out the answer, though I couldn't and I wouldn't try to, since I never went back to that place and don't plan to. Imagine if it was nighttime as well. I just don't recommend people going out exploring these unknown or potentially dangerous spots. At around 3:20 a.m., I was walking through the nighttime woods, and if you're wondering why that is the case, it is because I had gotten slightly lost when trying to make my way back to my camping spot. I was meant to go back before it was midnight, but I guess I got too comfortable with staying outside at night and didn't bring my map or anything to really help me that much. I thought my flashlight would help me enough to memorize the trails. I guess this is what might happen when overestimating your own abilities with certain stuff. It isn't really ideal when trouble comes to your situation. Anyway, it wasn't like I could just sit down and complain all day. I had to try make my way back somehow. I would just check my watch quite a lot of times, since keeping track of time would be somewhat important. Around 30 minutes later, I found an isolated building structure that looked to be quite abandoned. I was thinking maybe I could try explore this structure to potentially find temporary shelter until sunrise. I went through and of course there wasn't much to find in there. If it was free of bugs or animals, that would be fine. I looked around and it seemed to have little to no issues, so I sat there and tried falling asleep in the process. My eyes were closed and it seemed like it was going to be a nice relaxing temporary stay in this abandoned structure thing. However, I could hear something moving around nearby to me. It sounded really disgusting for me, like insects moving around and high-pitched sounds, though I didn't expect it to be close by to me, so I wasn't bothered initially. However, a minute after hearing those sounds, a burst of tiny mice started coming out from a little opening within the structure. I was terrified and instantly got up from my position and walked backwards very fast. By the time I had done that, I couldn't really see any of the mice anymore. They either rushed away or was blending in really well within the darkened environment. I started speed walking away from that location and was cringing from seeing all those mice right nearby to me, especially since I was sitting down. If they were to crawl on my legs or something, just thinking of that feels gross. It felt like my patience was running out and I just wanted to rest so that I could find my camping spot after sunrise. So I found a tree where I could lean on and sleep for some time. I finally managed to get some sleep and the sun was slightly out, just enough for me to be able to see properly at least. I was walking around and I could recognize the area a little. It didn't seem too far away from where I needed to go, so I kept making my way through the woods, following a small trail. Now that I was able to see properly, it was a lot more easier. I made it back to my tent and was very happy. That feeling of the stress being lifted from the mind and heart was amazing. I continued camping for another day, but made sure to stay close by to where my stuff was located. I understood that it was my fault for thinking I could navigate myself through the night, especially without sufficient equipment to do so. I hope no one lets their ego or overconfidence get to them like this, as it isn't good to have whatsoever in any way or any situation. That abandoned structure though, it was a very bad experience to just be there with those mice coming out like that. Be safe when out there, alone or with other people.